You know that moment. Someone says something about you or about your work, or the decision you made, or the thing you believed in. In less than a second, your opinion of yourself updates to match theirs. You know, intellectually, that you shouldn't let one person's reaction do that. You've told yourself this. You've read the books, you've journaled, you've sat with therapists who've explained it clearly, and you still felt it. The problem was never knowledge. Your sense of your own worth isn't actually yours yet. It still lives, partially, in other people's hands, and they can move it without even trying. This is going to explain why that happens precisely, psychologically, and what building actual self-worth requires. Not the kind that collapses when someone looks at you the wrong way. The kind that stays. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Self-esteem and self-worth are not the same thing. They feel like the same thing. They get used interchangeably even by psychologists who should know better. But the difference is like a building on sand versus a building on rock. Self-esteem fluctuates. It responds to outcomes. When you do well, it rises. When you fail, it drops. When someone approves, it inflates. When someone withdraws, it deflates. Self-esteem is a performance score, and like all performance scores, it depends entirely on the performance going well. Self-worth is different, not better self-esteem, not higher self-esteem, different in kind. Self-worth is the foundational belief that you matter, that you are deserving of care, of space, of basic dignity, not because of what you've achieved, or who's approved of you, but because you exist. Most people who came out of toxic relationships, critical families, or environments where love was conditional were never given this. They were given the opposite, a lesson, learned early, that their worth was something they had to earn, something that could be granted or revoked. That lesson went in deep. It shaped how you move through every room, and it's the reason that until you address it directly, not through affirmations, not through achievements, the sand never becomes rock. In 2001, psychologist Jennifer Crocker at the University of Michigan published research that took 12 years of data and built one of the most important arguments in modern self-concept psychology. She studied what she called contingent self-esteem, self-worth built on conditions. Specifically, what happens to people when their sense of value depends on external things, academic performance, others' approval, appearance, competition. What she found was specific and devastating. People with highly contingent self-esteem, people whose sense of worth rose and fell based on external feedback, reported significantly higher anxiety, higher depression, more conflict in relationships, and less genuine motivation than people whose self-worth was more stable and internally grounded. But the more disturbing finding came next. The people with contingent self-esteem weren't just unhappier, they were more exhausted. Because maintaining contingent self-esteem requires constant effort, constant vigilance over how you're being perceived, constant performance to maintain the approval that makes you feel okay, constant management of the evidence. It's a full-time job that never ends. Because there's always another person whose approval hasn't been secured, always another evaluation coming. Compare this to what Roy Baumeister at Florida State University argued in his decades of self-esteem research. When self-worth is internally grounded, when it doesn't depend on the next outcome, it acts less like a fuel gauge that needs constant refilling and more like a foundation that simply holds. You don't have to refill it, you just build on it. Most people have been trying to build the first structure their whole lives, working harder, achieving more, earning more approval, assuming that eventually there will be enough, that the self-worth will finally feel stable. It doesn't work that way. I know what you've tried. You've worked harder. You've gotten better at things. You've accomplished things that should, by any reasonable measure, make you feel good about yourself. And they do, for a while, and then the feeling passes, and you need the next thing. This is what Crocker called the contingency treadmill. The moment you base your worth on achievement, you've guaranteed that any achievement will only produce temporary relief, because the next evaluation is already coming. Your brain is not broken for responding this way. It's doing exactly what it was conditioned to do. If your earliest experiences taught you that love and worth were contingent on performance, that you were praised when you succeeded and withdrawn from when you didn't, your nervous system learned that achievement is safety. Of course, it keeps seeking it. Here's what nobody told you about that pattern. It's not low self-esteem you're dealing with. It's borrowed self-esteem. Self-esteem that was always someone else's to give or take. And you've been trying to accumulate enough of it that you can finally own some for yourself. That's not how ownership works. The psychologist and philosopher William James wrote in 1890 that self-esteem equals success divided by pretensions, the ratio of what you achieve to what you believe you should achieve. The problem is that for people with conditional worth, the denominator, what you think you should be, always scales with the achievement. The ratio never improves. You move the goalpost automatically without choosing to. Because the point was never the goal. The point was the feeling of being enough, and that feeling lives upstream of any goal you could reach. Unshakable self-worth doesn't mean you don't feel anything when someone criticizes you. That's a common misreading, and it leads people to pursue a kind of emotional blunting that looks like strength and is actually just another kind of disconnection. What it looks like is this. Someone challenges your work or your character and you feel the impact, you register it genuinely, and then you evaluate it without being consumed by it. You can ask, is there something true here? What do I actually think? What do I know about myself that speaks to this? You can disagree with someone's assessment of you without needing to convince them they're wrong. You can be disliked by someone without needing to repair it. You can fail at something without updating your fundamental sense of whether you deserve to exist in the world. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, Stoic philosopher, a man who faced daily evaluation by millions and had to decide whose opinion of him would constitute the actual record, wrote that the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. What he meant, the insanity is handing your sense of yourself to whatever the crowd thinks at any given moment. That's a permanent hostage situation. Here's the honest account of how this is built, not through self-affirmations. I won't waste your time on those. Research consistently shows that positive affirmations reduce self-worth in people with low self-worth, because the gap between the affirmation and the felt sense is too large. The brain rejects it as false, not through more achievement. We've covered why the treadmill doesn't stop. What Crocker's later research and work by Kristen Neff on self-compassion consistently points toward is something quieter and harder. Building a relationship with yourself that is based on values, consistent behavior, not outcome. Here's what that means practically. Every time you act in alignment with what you value, not what earns approval, not what avoids conflict, but what you actually believe is right and good, you make a deposit into a kind of internal account. Not confidence, not pride, something deeper and quieter. Integrity, in the literal sense. Integration, the sense that who you are inside and what you do outside are the same person. Crocker found that students who pursued academic goals for intrinsic reasons because the learning itself mattered to them experienced far less anxiety and showed more genuine well-being than those pursuing the same goals for external validation. Same behavior, entirely different internal experience. The reason changed everything. The work is this: noticing, repeatedly, when you're about to do something for their approval and instead of your own integrity. And choosing not always, not perfectly, but increasingly to act from the inside out. It accumulates, slowly, over months and years, not days. One concrete place to begin. The next time someone's reaction to you causes that familiar internal collapse, the opinion update, the sudden recalibration of your worth. Pause before responding to them, and ask yourself one question: what do I actually know to be true about my intention here? Not what they think, what you know. That question, practiced consistently, begins to locate your worth where it actually belongs. In you. You've been earning your right to exist your whole life. in rooms that required performance, in relationships that needed you to be less, or more, or different. In your own head, with a running audit of whether what you did today counted as enough. That auditor was installed, it wasn't born with you. And like everything installed, it can be updated, not deleted. You'll still hear it sometimes. But its voice becomes one input among many, rather than the only one that matters. Unshakable doesn't mean impervious. It means that, when something hits you, you return to yourself rather than remaining wherever the impact left you. That return gets shorter, and easier, and quieter, until one day you realize you've been standing on your own ground for long enough that it finally feels like yours. If you want to understand the identity layer beneath self-worth, who you actually are when the performing self gets stripped away, the video on building identity without approval goes directly into that.